Hello and welcome to the 2017 Personal Health Summit. If you're looking to become healthier and happier than you've ever been before, then you've come to the right place. The Personal Health Summit features an international collaboration of leading doctors, scientists, researchers, and health ambassadors, all working to change the conversation and transform world health. Every expert here is to share with you their knowledge, wisdom, and expertise to help you learn, grow, and become empowered to make informed choices and take control of your health and your life. Our mission, first and foremost, is to help you recognize that you are unique, that there are many different avenues to achieving and maintaining optimal health, and that there is one that's right for you at this very moment in time. Being informed is being empowered. And when you have the right information, you have the power to change your health, your happiness, and your life. The Personal Health Summit is made possible by the generous support of the Ultimate Human Foundation, who's committed to educating and empowering people all over the globe to be proactive about their personal health, providing truly personalized health solutions for every human being on the planet with accessibility and affordability, and orchestrating and nurturing a global gathering of the world's key health experts and thought leaders at the vanguard of their respective fields, where solutions can be found to transform the future health of humanity. The Personal Health Summit is also made possible by PH360.me, the world's most advanced health assistant that interacts with you via your smartphone, just like a best friend who can calculate the best nutrition and lifestyle choices to most favorably and easily influence your unique hormones, genes, and personal state of health, empowering you to make easy, accurate lifestyle decisions to improve your sleep, energy, mood, weight, digestion, and well-being. Now, on to today's show. I'm here with one of the top 100 most influential people in health and fitness today, Dr. David Katz, who's the founding director of the Prevention Research Center at Yale University. He's the current president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He's a medical contributor for the ABC News and Good Morning America, and he's a health nutrition columnist for the New York Times and the Huffington Post, amongst many other titles. So if you've ever wondered how you can outsmart chronic disease and live your healthiest, happiest life yet, you'll get all those answers you're looking for today during the call with Dr. David Katz. David, it's great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us here today for this conversation on arguably one of the most important things that's happening in the world right now, that is our life and our health. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be back with you. Some of that intro was actually correct, and the rest was written by my mother. And then, you said this is going to be action-packed. I feel like I should be jumping up and down out of my chair as we're talking, but we'll do the best we can to make it action-packed. Huh?
We'll do what we need to do. If you got some comments you want to see that from David, we'll see what happens on this show. So, David, let's jump into some big conversations, because that's what we're here for. So let's talk about from your perspective, what's the solution to our worldwide epidemics of chronic disease that plague almost 4 billion people on the planet today? Where do we start?
Yeah, it's interesting, Matt. I mean, we're living through some very interesting times around the world, and we've actually seen something that has been a major factor in lifestyle medicine and preventive medicine infiltrate politics, and that's this whole issue of the post-truth era and fake news. It used to be that in journalism, certainly here in the States and in robust democracies around the world, we didn't have to worry too much about fake news. News was news. But in lifestyle medicine, preventive medicine, we've been dealing with fake news for decades. And it's interesting to have this now culture-wide reckoning with the magnitude of the problem. And I was doing an interview earlier today, and that was basically the question: how big a threat to health is fake news? And I think the answer to your question kind of begins there. It's a huge threat, and it's long been a huge threat. And from discussions we've had before, both online and off, Matt, you know that I consider the literature about the fundamentals of a health-promoting lifestyle extremely robust. And of quite an old vintage. So, I routinely start that conversation 24 years ago now with the publication in 1993 of a paper entitled Actual Causes of Death in the United States. And that literature has become only more robust over the past 24 years. But, essentially 24 years ago, we were already able to make the case that we could eradicate roughly 80% of premature death and chronic disease with lifestyle practices. And I think that begs the question, Well, did we do it? And the answer is no. Actually, the burden of chronic disease has gone up over the past 24 years. And then, well, why? If we knew how to prevent 80% of premature death and chronic disease, what could possibly talk us out of doing it? And the answer is ourselves. We have met the enemy, and it is us. We basically keep debating the fundamental actionable truths about healthy living rather than putting them to good use. And the beauty of this conversation between the two of us is, your platform, we talk a lot about personalizing medicine and the lifestyle prescription. And you and I agree. There are fundamentals about a health promoting lifestyle that pertain to all Homo sapiens. We are a species. For example, tobacco isn't good for anybody. Avoiding tobacco is good for everybody, right? So there are those things that we've long known that would be beneficial for absolutely everyone. And then if you can superimpose on those fundamentals the customization piece, then first of all, you make it easier for people to get there from here. You provide a more refined prescription. You increase the likelihood of success, all that good stuff. But that ability now to personalize and customize, and that's an ability that's growing all the time, as with insights into underlying genetic polymorphisms that have implications for metabolism and such. That's the new piece, but it doesn't invite us to ignore that piece that we've been holding in our hands these 24 years. That's where the conversation begins. So the prize here could be an 80% reduction in our personal risk for any major chronic disease, an 80% reduction in the global burden of chronic disease. 8 times in 10 premature deaths due to chronic disease don't need to happen. And I think it's time for all of us to ask ourselves and one another, what are we waiting for?
Such a great question, David. And I just love the conversation that you bring to these shows that we have. And let's talk a little bit about what most people think of when they think of health, and it's about food. Everything kind of starts at food. Everyone thinks that food is where things are at when it comes to health or prevention or even reversal of disease. We're always looking for the next culprit, the next fad, the next way to do it. And at the moment, we're sitting here with, are we supposed to be doing low carb? Are we supposed to be doing low fat? Are we supposed to be doing the paleo diet or the juice fast or the zone diet? Where do we go here? Like, let's cut through some of the crap for a minute. And like, what is it? What are we supposed to be doing with food? How does this work? Where do we start?
Yeah, and I agree. And I think, there are a couple of reasons why food is the centerpiece, Matt. I mean, first of all, everybody eats pretty much every day, except for the people who are on the particular diet that has them fasting several days out of the month. It's also the most complicated piece. So, the lifestyle medicine formula, as I describe it, and other people use different language, but it's the same gist. I say it's feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. Feet, physical activity; forks, dietary pattern; fingers, no cigarettes; adequate sleep; mitigating stress; strong social connections. Feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. And they're all very important. But diet, we interact with it every day. It's the fuel that runs our body, so it's a constant exposure. It's an intimate exposure. It's a potent exposure, and it's a complex exposure. So I think there's a lot of reason to place a special emphasis on that. But then, the fundamentals of the health promoting diet really are quite simple. A diet of minimally processed foods, mostly plants, and water when you're thirsty takes you a long way toward the promised land. It really does. Now, you want that to be higher or lower protein? Fine. You want it to be higher or lower fat? Fine. And you want it to be higher or lower in carbohydrate? Basically fine up to a point. What I think a lot of low-carb advocates overlook is that every plant food is principally carbohydrate. I mean, it's just a fact. So you really can't eat truly low-carb unless you're eating low vegetable, low fruit, low beans, low lentils, low nuts, low seeds, as well as low grains. The idea that just avoiding grains is low carb, no. All fruits are carbohydrate. All vegetables are carbohydrate. So it's hard to eat a truly low carbohydrate diet and retain the most healthful foods. But within reason, you can have significant sway in your protein levels, your carbohydrate levels, your fat levels, and still get the formula right. If you're mostly eating vegetables, fruits, I like whole grains too, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, water preferentially when thirsty. And if you get the foods right, you can't go too far wrong. Now, what about sugar? Well, if you eat a diet of minimally processed, mostly plant foods and drink water, you're not consuming much added sugar. Okay, but what about trans fat? Just about none, because you're not eating hyper-processed foods. Okay, then, yeah, but what about sodium? Well, 80% of the sodium in our diets comes not from a salt shaker on our table, but from highly processed foods. That problem's fixed. Okay, yeah, but there seems to be a lot of confusion these days about saturated fat. Should we focus on that? No need. If you eat a diet of minimally processed, mostly plant foods with lots of the things I just mentioned, most of the fat in your diet is going to be poly and monounsaturated, and you probably get a pretty healthy balance of omega-3 and omega-6 by avoiding processed foods. And if you add in fish and seafood in particular, another problem solved, and on it goes. So, the answer really is to focus on foods rather than nutrients. And if you eat wholesome foods, minimally processed, mostly plants, in almost any sensible combination, you will be monumentally better off than most people in modern society. And then you have options. Do we know which specific diet is best? As you know, Matt, from prior discussions, I wrote a paper for the peer-reviewed literature a couple of years ago. It was published in the Annual Review of Public Health, entitled, "Can We Say What Diet is Best for Health?" And that was my job. The editors gave me the marching orders. Look at the literature without bias, work however hard you have to, it's not our problem, and answer the question. And my answer was, yes, I can answer the question, and no, nobody can answer the question. If what we mean by "can we say what diet is best for health" is a general theme of healthy eating, so that theme I've just described, the evidence is overwhelming. It really, really is. It's just not up for debate. I mean, whether we're talking randomized trials or mechanistic studies in cell culture, whether we're talking about the experience of whole populations in the blue zones or an intervention trial spanning decades in North Karelia, Finland, or almost any other source of evidence you can think of, it all basically backs up the same contention: a diet of minimally processed foods, mostly plants, plain water for thirst. But if by that question we mean, can we say what very specific diet is best? Are you better off with 40% of your calories coming from fat or 32% of your calories coming from fat? How specific can we be? The answer is no, because we really don't have the long-term randomized trials in huge populations for a whole lifetime to say that one of these is better than the other. So, for instance, do I know whether an optimal vegetarian diet or an optimal Mediterranean diet or an optimal pescatarian diet or an optimal paleo diet, for that matter, is the best for human health over the long term? I don't know, because nobody's done that study, and nobody's going to either. One other final consideration, Matt, it's a little outside the standard realm of our discussion, but we can't ignore it, because it's either the canary in the coal mine or the elephant in the room or some combination of the two. And that's environmental impact of our diets, right? I mean, these days with ever nearer to 8 billion hungry Homo sapiens on the planet, the day to think about dietary intake without taking stock of its impact on aquifers and climate and rainforests and biodiversity has come and gone, right? I mean, we have to think beyond our own skin. And it's very interesting. I have some colleagues who are world-leading experts in the paleo diet. And we both agree that, Homo sapiens are constitutional omnivores. We've been eating meat for 2 million years. Since the days of Homo erectus, it's normal for our species. And arguably good for us too. But meat-centric diets are clearly no longer good for the planet. They're probably no longer good for us either, because we've done so much to change the nature of the meat, right? Most people who eat meat are not eating antelope. They're eating bologna and pepperoni, and there was no Stone Age pepperoni, let's face it. So there are other issues too. But the environmental costs of beef are huge. The carbon footprint is huge. The water consumption is huge. That's got to be part of the discussion. So these days when I talk about what diet is best for health, I'm thinking health of the planet as well as health of the people, because there are no healthy people without a planet to call home.
It's beautiful, David. And let's explore that for a little minute, because it's really important to understand that evolution is part of humanity, and that often we forget that. And what's been great for us in the past, maybe not so relevant right now. And we know that even from, tracking genetics, groups that used to live in certain locations that then become, conditioned with the environments and the lifestyles that are in those places, like the blue zones. When they move out of those climates and those conditions, then it's a different story. Your genes are suddenly exposed to different conditions, and we can have different illnesses and sicknesses that may come up. What about if we look at that from an evolution perspective as well? Like, as you start to talk about there, maybe our diets change over time. We see this a lot in a trend now. Maybe our school systems are changing. The way that we're learning is different now. We understand that, it's more of a personalized learning approach than what it used to be in the groups. Food itself is the same thing. We're looking at saying, well, here's what we used to eat as a humanity approach, and now we're changing things. We're understanding more of a personalized approach is the same. We can talk about themes that are good for us, for foods. Specifically, we know that, if one person eats bread, they may get, quite sick and ill. Another person may get some energy from it. Another person might eat and have a bad reaction. Another person might not. So where are we going with this, trajectory? What does this look like in the near future for us with, understanding now that each person responds very differently to foods, but also each person responds very differently to the environment and the interactions with the environment we have too?
Really, really interesting question, Matt. And again, I think it nicely juxtaposes the value of fundamentals of a health promoting lifestyle, which we really do share, and then the value in customization. And, I think we agree that those two things really fit together very well. So, there's sort of the big picture here, and then there are the subtleties that are evolving now. The big picture, absolutely. The evidence is clear. There was no particular point in time when natural selection stopped. And people often carry on about that as if, we're not adapted to eat grains because we've only been eating them for 15,000 years. 15,000 years is a long time. And if it's helped us survive over 15,000 years, it's probably had a significant impact on our physiology. So, some people are probably very well adapted to eat grains, and that's leaving out arguments that they may have been part of our diet for 100,000 years. But I think the more interesting case is dairy. People get very, very passionate about dairy. People, who make the case it's not normal for people to consume dairy. It's just wrong somehow. Well, they have a point, up to a point. It is not normal for adult mammals to digest lactose. And so the gene that produces the lactase enzyme that enables us to break down the lactose sugar in milk is active in infancy and then is supposed to turns off around the time that we're weaned. It does that in all mammals, except it no longer does that in all human mammals. There are human populations, notably people who have ancestry in Northern Europe, where 95% of the population is now lactose tolerant throughout life. Now, you could argue that's not normal, but there's another argument. That's adaptation. Essentially what it means is those populations over recent millennia had a survival advantage by retaining the ability to digest dairy. So for them, that's an adaptation every bit as valid as adaptations that happened during the Stone Age. Natural selection didn't stop. So on the one hand, we can sort of look at the relevance of adaptation, evolutionary biology, and say, well, it's really interesting. What it tells us is the dairy question's a complicated one. Okay, it's not normal for most adult mammals to consume dairy, and some adult humans are ill-disposed to do it because they don't keep making lactase. But other populations of humans do keep making lactase. They obviously have adapted to consume dairy. It's now a normal part of their diets. One of the most interesting explorations of this topic, Matt, and it's right in your wheelhouse because it's really all about customization, was a study that compared gene frequencies in India and the United States. And they were looking specifically at genes related to the production of long-chain fatty acids from short. And if we get into the weeds here, our eyes will glaze over, to say nothing of the audience members. But the gist of it was this, that in India, where in many parts of the country, vegetarianism has been the standard practice for generations, people have adapted to being vegetarian. And what they've developed is the ability to produce long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids from short chain with great efficiency. And they've also developed the ability to produce long chain saturated fatty acids. It was interesting because, one of the implications of this research, and the research was not a dietary intervention, it was just looking at gene frequencies, but one of the implications was, if you're from a population that is specifically adapted to do well on a vegetarian diet, so for instance, if you're good at making long-chain omega-3s from short-chain omega-3s, you probably face a greater risk from the typical American diet than the average person. Because the same genetic apparatus that makes you good at that will cause you to overproduce inflammatory fatty acids when you eat lots of hamburgers and French fries. So beware. Really, really interesting. And an argument that, again, adaptation is still happening and that populations really do differ in important ways, which is why the kind of work that you're doing is so important. Let's make sure people understand the fundamentals, but then let's also work on customizing. And as you know, that science of customizing is evolving itself as we identify more relevant genes and gene patterns, because it's not just about this gene or that gene. It's, a whole suite of genes, and which ones do you have and how active are they? And then finally, the other piece that's being added here is, in many instances, whatever genes you have, gene activity is modifiable with lifestyle. So it's interactive. It's not just you've got this gene, therefore you must do this. No, you've got this gene, you're probably better off doing this, but if you do this, it will affect the gene and what it produces. And so, there are subtleties now in terms of what is your genetic or your genomic profile, and what is your epigenetic or your epigenomic profile. How has your lifestyle influenced the levers and switches of the epigenome that in turn influence what your genes do, and how that then affects your metabolism. All of that is moving now. It's all in motion. We're learning more about it all the time. It's fascinating, really important, and I think really heartening. I think people can be excited about the notion that fundamentals of good nutrition are not going to change, but the ability of healthcare professionals to coach me, to kind of anticipate my reactions and to know maybe I don't have celiac, but maybe something in my genetic profile says I would be better off avoiding gluten. And it would be useful to know, no, I don't have to worry about gluten. Gluten is not going to be harmful to me. And, I should avoid dairy, or dairy's fine for me, or I would benefit from a bit more fat. I'm particularly dependent on soluble fiber. All of those things, there are ranges that are good for us in general. But there's some place in the range that's ideal for any one of us specifically. And we get a little better at providing that guidance every day.
Beautiful, David. And I guess one of the big things that you brought up there too was just about understanding, the difference in all of us. And that's really what this show is all about, the Get Healthy Now show. If you're new to this show, I'm glad that you're here. We talk all about the different uniqueness in health, some incredible conversations that's happening today with Dr. David Katz. If you just joined us, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for all your comments. We're going to get through as many questions as we can today. Really appreciate it. And David, you just mentioned then about genetics and epigenetics and the differences we have in individuals. And, we're now uncovering a lot more about genetics than what we ever knew. We used to, I guess still a lot talk about things in the science and medicine firm as, this gene responds to this action or this gene determines this. And we're now knowing all the new evidence that it's not just one gene that's involved in certain processes. There's actually a whole host of interactions with genes that cause or relate to some sort of outcome. So even the conversation itself we're having is very new, which is why the topic or conversation of epigenetics is so important, that we understand that, as we've talked about on the show so far, that different environments and lifestyles influence different populations and actually change the way their genetics actually express and interact. Let's talk about that for just a minute. So our environment and our lifestyle can actually influence who we are in our health. What does that even mean to anyone listening today? How do we even comprehend that? What does that mean we should do? Should people go stand out in the sun all day? Do we hang out with people who are having a good time and laugh more? Do we, deep breathe more often in good oxygenated air? Like, what does this actually mean for us right now? Can you give us some starting points for the conversation today?
Yeah, those are all good ones. There are two really important issues there, Matt. The first is, what are the actionable things we can do? So again, I see the formula. And this is just a succinct way of capturing what is extremely abundant in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. So if you're not active, be more active. Just get up and walk, stand up from your chair routinely. I'm sitting now for the sake of this interview, but I sit less and less and less. At conferences I stand, and at meetings I stand, and I often pace as well. And when I'm working in my office, I get up routinely and come back to the chair, and I do my thinking while walking, and then I sit to write, and then I get up again. That's easy. Most people can do that. Any way to shoehorn a little more motion into the course of the daily routine, clearly a good thing. The human animal is meant to be a vital, active animal. Let it off its leash, take it out of its cage, it will thrive. Your suggestions about sunlight, yeah, sunlight's good for us up to a point. Obviously, we don't want to get burned and we have to worry about skin cancer, but in general, being outdoors is good for people. Being in nature is good for people. I put on my list of 6 factors: feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, love. And love, I'm generally referring to relationships, but I think there's a lot more to love. Purpose in life. You can love the place that you spend your time. You can love nature. Basically doing things that cultivate your spiritual well-being. So, I love nature, and when I can be outside and when I can be physically active outside, it helps me be well. It dissipates my stress. And actually, I think that's important, because maybe it's, 6 things you have to attend to sounds like a lot. But I think you can double dip. If you sleep well, you're less prone to stress. If you exercise, that may be your stress relief. So these things, fortunately, sometimes you can fire on more than one cylinder at a time. So, the formula really is to do what you can to be more active throughout your routine day, to shift your diet. And you can do this at the level of your whole diet. You can do this at the level of an individual food choice. If you're used to snacking on highly processed chips or something, and you're willing to eat raw almonds instead, do. You're trading up. If you're willing to have an apple instead of some processed snack food, do. You're trading up. Little things can add up to make a big difference. Imagine if, you snack routinely every day, and you just swapped out junky snacks for good snacks, and you did nothing more than that. Well, you'd be taking out sugar and salt and bad fat, and you'd be adding vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and fiber. It would be a really, really nice trade up. And it's easy. There's not a lot of heavy lifting involved. Sleep. Go to sleep at a reasonably consistent time. Have a relaxation routine before sleep to try and help you get there. And make it a priority. Those hours we often think of as downtime, they're not downtime. They are rejuvenation time, really, really important. Again, managing stress, critically important, but, how do you do that? Well, maybe it's being in nature. For me, maybe it's riding my horse. Different strokes for different folks, but you can double dip. It may very well be that the workout that you need anyway is also your stress relief. Well, fine. Then okay, you don't have to work out and meditate, although that would be good too. Or maybe it is meditation. That's also fine. So, the formula is relatively clear. And I don't think there's a single best way to get there from here. And it's often very hard to say which is the critical first step. And again, this is where I place such a great value on your work and your message, Matt. The idea that the coaching can be personalized. Because, if your sleep is horrible, it may be that you need to address that before you have the energy to exercise. And if you can't sleep because you're stressed out, you might have to address the stress before you can improve the sleep, which improves the energy, which allows you to exercise. And, round and round we go. The good news is that making any one of these better can help you make the next one better, and then the next, and the next, and the next. So I like all of your suggestions. A bit more sunshine, good social interaction, a bit more laughter. Yeah, that's all good medicine right there.
Beautiful, David. Thank you. And welcome again. Thank you all so much for being here on the Get Healthy Now show. We're here with Dr. David Katz, one of the top 100 most influential people in health and fitness. He's a founding director of Prevention Research Center at Yale, the current president of American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Really great to have a conversation here with you today, David. And David, I'm just wondering if you could share with us just a little bit about some of the new projects that you might be involved in. You're always on the cutting edge of everything that's going on around the world. What's happening in your world at the moment that you can share with us?
Thanks, Matt. Well, I've been excited now for some time about the importance of the True Health Initiative, and you are familiar with that. We started out talking about the sort of what's in the way and this issue of fake news, which has been a big problem in the health promotion space for many years. And, there's a lot of good information available out there these days. People like you doing a really great job of spreading good, actionable intel. But there's a lot of misinformation. And, in this age of the internet and the blogosphere and social media, there's ever more misinformation. And if we think about that as background noise, the basic issue is the more noise, the louder the signal needs to be heard above the noise. And that's become a really big global problem. So the True Health Initiative has been growing like crazy. It's my effort to pull together leading experts in diverse disciplines, but all concerned with sustainable human health. And sustainable means we have to think about the planet too. And we're now over 330 strong from 33 countries, and it just keeps growing. And it's really a who's who. I'm really proud of that because, these are folks who do not routinely band together. I've got world-leading vegan experts and world-leading paleo experts on the same council saying we agree about almost everything that matters most. We agree. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. It really is. So, I definitely would love people to go to truehealthinitiative.org, check that out, because this is not just any one person's opinion. This is a global who's who. And then a couple other things that I'm excited about. One of the things that happens a lot these days is, some idea in health promotion, or in particular nutrition, kind of, takes on a life of its own. And lately, there's been tremendous focus on the harms of excess sugar in our diets. I think that's fine. I think that's exactly right. We eat way too much added sugar. It's really bad for us. The only thing I'm appended to add to that is, duh. We've known it for so long. You can actually find 70-year-old videos on YouTube of Jack LaLanne warning us about the harms of excess sugar. No idea how Jack LaLanne made YouTube videos 70 years ago. He was an amazing guy. But they're there. So, this is not new. We've known this for a long time. The problem now is, the people who are acting like they just discovered this in their garage last Wednesday are implying that, the one thing wrong with our diets is excess sugar. Nothing else was ever true. And so there's been a lot of revisionist history, especially as it relates to the work of Ancel Keys. Ancel Keys is a famous physiologist. These days, you mostly hear about him recommending a low-fat diet, but he actually never did. He studied the Mediterranean diet, and what he found is that people in Europe with a Mediterranean diet had much better health outcomes and much less heart disease than people with a Northern European diet with a lot of animal foods and animal fat. But the Mediterranean diet is not at all a low-fat diet. It's rich in olive oil and olives and avocado and nuts and seeds and fish and seafood. It's actually higher in fat than the typical American diet. So Key's work has been seriously misrepresented. And I've been corresponding lately with a group of people who actually work directly with Dr. Keys. They were there and who know the details of the methods. And we've decided to work together, and this is partly through the auspices of the True Health Initiative, to kind of put together a comprehensive overview of what was that research, really, the methods and the messages. Because, these days there are a lot of people who are inclined to burn Ancel Keys in effigy, but based on misrepresentations of his work and what he said and what it meant. So I think that's a really important project because we should respect the good work of history. And, we would know what we know about diet and health now with or without the work of Ancel Keys, but that doesn't mean it's appropriate to misrepresent someone's entire career just because we now find it convenient to do so. I think that's an important item. And then, completely unrelated, I've been wrestling for some time with the challenges of assessing dietary intake. We're talking a lot about diet today, and if we're going to give people advice about how to improve their diet, we need to know how to assess their diet. What is their baseline diet? What is their goal diet? And what are the steps from one to the other? And that's problematic because the methods we have, food frequency questionnaires, 24-hour recalls, diet diaries, they're tedious. They're tedious to complete for you and for me. And then as someone who runs a research lab, that's my day job, they're tedious for us to analyze at the back end. If we get a diet diary, you fill out 3 or 7 days of everything you ate, I now have to pay a dietitian to work for hours to convert that gobbledygook into something that is meaningful. So, what was your intake of total calories and fiber and protein and fat, carbohydrate, and all the different nutrients? It's a lot of work. So I have actually invented a new method of assessing dietary intake that makes it almost effortless, almost instantaneous. And you can get an overview of what's cooking there at a website, dqpn.io. And DQPN stands for Diet Quality Photo Navigation. But basically working with colleagues to develop this new method where we can get your baseline diet in as little as 30 to 45 seconds. We can help identify your goal diet. And then we've basically got the incremental steps from where you are to where you want to be to facilitate coaching you, whether that's in person or via an app. So really excited. I think this is going to significantly accelerate our ability to provide good diet coaching in multiple platforms. And that should be ready sometime during 2017.
Fantastic, David. I love that you're always involved in so many cutting edge projects. And I just want to circle back to the first one you mentioned there and just tap into that for a little minute, because you talked about misrepresentation. And that's a really important conversation, I think, that I'd like to just get your thoughts on, because we are in a day and age where everybody's got the solution and you can just go on the internet and there's 5 bazillion people talking about what the best thing to do or what they did discover in their garage last Wednesday that's around for usually millennia. But it's one of those things that we can only hear what we can hear, right? Because whoever's got the most loudest and most saturated message on the internet or on TV or on the radio gets our attention. So in this day and age where literally media is dominating our thought processes, dominating our lifestyle habits, these sort of podcasts and these shows that we do like this, are unfortunately not mainstream TV often. They're some very small, ground up movements that are happening along the way. How do we get the message out there? Like, what do you see needs to happen to actually move from where we are now with the message that you share to actually have that as the common message that goes out there? To have the message that, hey, it's important to actually do all your fingers and forks and walks and all those sorts of things. How do we do that as standard protocol and as default in our life versus what we do at the moment, which is if we get sick, we'll do something about it. And it's hard to share the message of health. It's hard work trying to preach all the time these things. How does this change? Where do we change this?
Yeah. Well, so I guess there are 2 related questions, Matt. One is for you and for me, and how do we get the good message out there? And then the other would be for the audience. How do they identify the good message? So, in terms of our job and our responsibility, how do we do it right? The first thing is to be humble, to acknowledge that there are fundamentals we know and there's a lot we don't know. Bertrand Russell famously said, the whole thing wrong with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so sure and wiser people so full of doubts. I think we need to be wise enough to be full of relevant doubts, right? So one of the things we want to do is avoid overreaching. So we should say when we know what we know. But one of the other things people need to expect and accept from actually knowledgeable people is that they sometimes say, I don't know, we're not sure, we're still figuring that out, we're learning it. It's the people who know everything with absolute certainty that should give you pause. They are the dangerous people, really. So we need to be humble. We need solidarity. No one of us is strong enough, loud enough, clear enough, famous enough to get this job done alone. So we need alliances. We need to align with like-minded people, with other reasonably wise, humble people who, are willing to defend the truths that we know, but who are also willing to avoid the pitfalls of overstating what we know or pretending that there's one silver bullet or one single scapegoat. So we need to forge those alliances. That, of course, is what the True Health Initiative is all about. I think we also need to invoke the sense and responsibility of our audience. I think it's okay to tell the audience, listen, You have to decide. You need to use your judgment. You need to use sense. It's interesting. The average adult knows that get-rich-quick schemes are silly, right? They're a boondoggle. I mean, it's somebody's trying to separate you from your money. And yet that same average adult, lines up again and again and again for get-thin quick schemes or get-healthy quick schemes. Well, that's got to stop. So, I think one of the things we need to do is grab our audiences, grab our peer group by the lapels of common sense and say, snap out of it. You need to apply the same grown-up sense to health and weight that you apply to everything else in your life that matters. I think that's part of the formula, that expectation. I think we need to speak intelligently to intelligent people and count on them to invoke that sense and that intelligence. I think we should rally around the actionable fundamentals. I think, the case for customization is strong. I think we should make it, but I don't think we should ever miss an opportunity to remind people that if you avoid tobacco, are generally physically active, and eat a diet of mostly minimally processed plant foods and drink water when thirsty, you're 95% of the way there already. So don't miss that forest because you're fixated on climbing up some particular tree. I think that's really important. And then on the audience side of the equation, what should people listening do? I think they should routinely apply the sniff test. Does this sound right? I mean, is this somebody who's trying to sell me something, or is this someone who seems to care a lot about the legitimacy of information? Is this someone who seems to be making outrageous, too good to be true claims, or is this someone who seems to be talking sense? Is this someone who's got legitimate credentials? I mean, is this person impersonating an expert, or have they actually studied this? I think expertise actually matters. And in the lifestyle medicine space, we tend to act as if it doesn't. I mean, that's wrong. I mean, everybody who ate breakfast once thinks they're a nutrition expert. Well, I've driven over a suspension bridge. That doesn't mean you want me building one that you're going to drive your family on, right? So, sorry, I got a bit of chaos in the background there. There's a case for genuine expertise, and it's hard-earned. So, in my case, for instance, 9 years of postgraduate education, and that was really just the beginning. So, after completing university, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of residency training, and I was still a newbie after 9 years of postgraduate education. I wanted, for example, to write nutrition guidance books for the general public, but I thought, I should put myself before a jury of my peers first. So before I ever wrote my first diet guidance book for the general public, I wrote a nutrition textbook, which has now gone to 3 editions. It was an enormous amount of work. I learned a lot while writing it. But I thought, the real test here is, can I convince my colleagues who are trained like I am that I know what I'm talking about? Let them judge me first. And then if I run through that gauntlet successfully, I'm qualified to apply to them. Most people don't hold themselves to that standard, but I think the audience, the consumers out there who are exposed to this massive information need to apply filters. Is this somebody who has genuine credibility? And it's not that hard to check out. And I think expertise doesn't guarantee that the information is good. Experts can be wrong too, but it helps, and if you've been working in an area for years and decades, if you're highly trained in it, if you've been trained, part of training is training to scrutinize yourself. Again, I would say one of the principal conclusions to result from all of the years of formal training I have is there's a lot I don't know. And I can identify what I don't know. And I will admit what I don't know. And again, that kind of leads back to this notion that, the fools and fanatics are absolutely sure about everything. And they're the ones that should scare the heck out of you. Genuine experts readily acknowledge the limits of expert knowledge, because expert knowledge is always limited. So there are all these fairly obvious things to look for to help separate reliable information from worrisome information. So I think part of our message needs to be, here's how to judge information. Not just trust me, I'm giving you good information. And by the way, trust me, I'm giving you good information. And trust Matt, he's giving you good information. Our mothers think so too. No, but I think part of our message, Matt, needs to be, here are the filters you should apply all the time, and apply them to us. And if we don't pass through, then we're talking nonsense. But apply them all the time, and really think about health a bit more the way you think about wealth. Get rich quick schemes are a scam. Just apply that same basic sense to health information. There was a clothing store chain in the U.S. Sims, I think it was, but their famous motto was, "An educated consumer is our best customer." I think that's true in health. That's what we're looking for. So we need to be delivering reliable, valid, genuinely expert, but also appropriately humble information. And then we need to count on the sense and intelligence of consumers to be able to tell the difference.
Beautiful, David. Such incredible advice as always. And I really hope that everybody listening to this right now can really understand that and really just take some common sense on board, because it really does come down to that. And if you're wondering, the two main messages, common sense and the sniff test. If you're not sure what the David Katz sniff test is, you might need to listen to this right now. People, if you need to take one thing away from this conversation, there's many, many things, but feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress and love. Dr. David Katz, if there's one last message that you have that you'd like to share with everybody, if you had the captured attention of the 7.3 billion people listening on Earth right now, what would your message be for them?
Well, if I had everybody's attention, I would say that taking care of ourselves individually it's important. It's certainly possible, but collectively we can change culture. And in public health, we say all the time, think globally, act locally. So you just gave me access to a global audience. So if I really had that global audience, I would say let us find new ways to support one another, because we can do an awful lot to change our medical destiny as individuals and as families. But the places around the world where people live the longest, enjoy the most vitality, have the least chronic disease, and have the most favorable impact on the planet, it's because their culture gets it right. It's not individuals working to overcome the currents in our culture. It's cultures that flow in the right direction in the first place. And I think we ought to be thinking about that. So, all 7.5 billion of us together, we are culture. We are the environment. We are our exposures. Collectively, we control everything. And collectively, we can do things that individuals can't do. I mean, for example, in the U.S., we wring our hands about epidemic obesity and type 2 diabetes and chronic disease, but we aggressively market ultra-processed, highly caloric junk food. And we aggressively market it to children. On the one hand, we're lamenting rates of childhood obesity. On the other hand, our culture is profiting by propagating it. I mean, that's hypocrisy. So collectively, we could change that. Collectively, we could say we want dietary patterns at the level of our population that are kinder, gentler to the planet, that help preserve biodiversity, all of that. So I would say, to a global audience, think about what you can do to take better care of yourself and your family. And by acting locally, you can be one small part of a larger movement. But collectively, we should be thinking about a health promoting culture. And by promoting health, I mean of people and planet alike, because this is a beautiful planet. And I've got kids, and I want them to be able to enjoy it, and I want their kids to be able to enjoy it.
Such a beautiful message, Dr. David Katz. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Health, hope, and happiness. This is much bigger than just food. This is all about coming together as a collective, understanding that as a community, as a nation, as a whole race, that we can actually make a huge difference to how we are individually with our own health, with our own happiness, but also the health of the planet. I just love how you blend those together, David. It's such an important conversation. So thank you once again for sharing all that with us today.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us, for supporting this gathering of world experts, thought leaders, and innovators looking to change the course of the health and wellness of the human race, and for being empowered and actively committed to your own health in mind, body, and spirit. I'm Matt Riemann, and on behalf of all of us at the Personal Health Summit, we thank you for tuning in, and we wish you the utmost personal health and happiness in every day of your life?